Welcome to the Philly Prime Podcast. I'm Dave Schratweiser. Today, the podcast collides with MobTalk, and the Philadelphia Mob Bruno Scarfo Facebook page. We're all going to be in one thing, and there's no better person to have on the show when you're going to do a show like that than my good friend George Anastasia, author, professor, magazine writer, former Inquirer reporter. The list goes on and on. George, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Dave. Good to be here.
All right, George, the reason we're all getting together for episode 100 on the Philly Prime Podcast is to talk about something this week that launched. The Philly mob world went from dead quiet to a parade down Broad Street in South Philly because mob boss Joey Merlino launched a Instagram page, a YouTube channel, and a podcast this week. Just like he said he was going to do it, he did it. George, your reaction when you saw this?
Well, these guys have been talking about this for a long time. I think one of the things that gets under their skin is guys who have cooperated are doing this. Sammy Gravano, Michael Franzese, John A. Light, Panisi. And the perception from the underworld is these guys are making money on this. I think some of them are, some of them aren't.
Yeah.
And Joey just decided, why let these guys, have the entire field? I'm going to jump in. Now, I don't know if everybody's happy with that in the underworld, but this is the reality of 2023 social media, America, the mob world. It's just a whole different place than it was, say, 30, 40 years ago. And that's part of what this is.
Yeah, and I think maybe we change his name from Joey Skinny Merlino to Joey Skinny Social Media Merlino. A couple of our colleagues have done that already. But, I mean, listen, he's all over it. His Instagram page in 1 week, 12,000 followers. That number's a little low right there. That's from a few days ago. His YouTube channel is doing pretty well. They launched the first episode of the podcast overnight, and his other social media is doing, pretty well. Yeah. And so we're not accused of anything down the road here. Let me read you their description of this podcast, website, Instagram page stuff. The Skinny with Joey Merlino delves into the life and times of notorious mobster turned sports betting virtuoso Joey Merlino, blending edgy tales of mafia-era gambling with contemporary politics. Listen in as we uncover Joey's incredible journey, George, revealing how sports betting, politics, and organized crime intertwine in ways you could never have imagined, George.
It's going to be interesting to follow. I mean, the question, Dave, going forward is, other than handicapping games, what's the content? Can it sustain itself? And as I mentioned, those guys, the other guys I mentioned who had testified and/or cooperated, or they've got stories to tell and they put it out there. Joey probably has stories to tell, but there's always going to be, how far can he go?
Yeah.
And that's what remains to be seen. And maybe it'll work out well. I mean, maybe he's certainly, a charismatic guy. He's got a lot of personality. I just don't know if it's sustainable in terms of what the content's going to be other than handicapping sports. I think the tease this past week was, I'm going to talk about rats. I'm coming after you. Well, we'll see where that goes. I was thinking about this the other day, Dave. You and I think, we're the other side of the hill now. Thank God.
Yeah.
I think were we active, we would not be able to do what we did 20 years ago. We were, in a lot of ways, the middleman between the public that's got interest in this and the underworld. There's no need for a middleman anymore. These guys go up on social media, and there they are. Why would somebody have to read my story if they could go watch Joey Merlino in person every week?
Yeah.
Again, the question, however, is how good is the content? And this is a problem not just with Merlino and Franzese and Gravano and all those guys. The problem with social media is there's no filter.
Mm-hmm.
You get up and you say whatever you want to say, and there's nobody challenging you.
No.
When we worked in the media for a television station or for a newspaper, there were editors that were constantly questioning, how can you say this? How do you know that? How do you support that?
Right.
Not happening anymore.
No. Interesting. Joey has said several times now this week that there will be a podcast every week. He's going to talk about all kinds of topics. The first one dropped yesterday on YouTube. It's doing pretty good
Right.
on his site. And part of this whole thing is that you can sign up for Joey's website and pay, I think, $45, $100, or $300, depending on which subscription you get. When you get to see this, you get to hear his picks each week and all that kind of. So that's what you're paying for in a subscription situation. I'd love to know at some point what kind of membership enrollment has happened already. But he's promising a podcast every week. The
Right.
first one dropped, he talked about Donald Trump and his interactions with him, the whole story about him fixing the election, that bogus story that floated out of some Buffalo newspaper right after Trump lost, and put him in the spotlight. He talks about a call from his mom saying, they're saying you fixed the election. Yeah. He talks about meeting up with Trump on the golf course down in Florida, because he's played Trump's course apparently a few times. And I guess Trump wanted to play through at one point. So Joey let him and the Secret Service play through. He birdied the hole and came back and thanked Joey. Some very charismatic, funny stories. Yeah. He was funny. He was quick-witted. He was kind of right on the money with where he stands on certain things. They were talking about flipping and rats and stuff. And he got into that whole thing, which I want to talk to you about in a minute. If something's going to get him in trouble, the way he ended that podcast could be it. But let me say this. I thought for the first episode, it was well done. He's delivering on something he promised. He probably got some upfront money for this. I'm hearing a six-figure upfront money situation. Last year he wanted more. That number dipped a little bit. He's got a backer or two, some of them who appear apparently in the background of a couple of his shots. So interesting launch, but you're right on the money, George. As you well know, doing podcasts and doing MobTalk, sit down and all that, you got to have content to sell these things.
Yeah. Yeah, the question is, can they sustain it? And we'll see. Certainly, there's always going to be sports to handicap. Yeah. Mentioned they're going to go from here into hockey and basketball. So there'll be plenty of stuff to handicap. This is just an aside, and no disrespect to Joey as a bettor, but there are guys in the underworld that say Joey was a lousy bettor. Joey wasn't really good. And if you remember back in the day, that particular group of guys, they were notorious for guzzling bookmakers. Guzzling meaning they would use phony names to bet and collect when they won and disappear when they lost. Mm-hmm. So, all of that is kind of the backstory to all of this of Joey as a handicapper. Now, we'll see how that goes. I mean, the writing is going to be on the wall. You pick a game, you pick a winner or loser. Over time, it's going to be, you know what you're doing or you don't. We'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, Joey's first pick was the Lions game last week. He won. The Lions came back and won that game. So he got a W in that column. That's the only one he kind of talked about on the podcast that he picked. Joe Perry, the guy who does the podcast with him, who did a fairly good job for a guy who that's not his main line of employment. He did a fairly good job directing Joey through the podcast. Little Snuff, they call him. He's widely known down South Philly along with his dad, kind of situation. And he went 0 for 2, apparently, in the picks he had. So that's where the rubber meets the road here, George. As you said, they went through the upcoming games for this week, plus including the Eagles game Thursday night against the Vikings. And I think the line is 7. And Joey obviously likes the Eagles here. But he even mentioned, I think, about, nobody will take a bet from me kind of thing in the podcast yesterday. I mean, he is notorious for, putting bets in all over the place. And I know bookies who say they can see Joey's bet coming from a mile away.
Well, yeah. I mean, during that big investigation, Ronnie Previty, who was working with the FBI, was running a book. And Previty claimed that particular group of guys were in debt to him for like $200,000. Mm-hmm. Now, they're going to, you talk to them now, they're going to say, oh, well, we knew it was the FBI. We're not going to pay, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
At the time, that was the way it was going. They were betting using phony names, straw names, and not paying when they lost, collecting when they won. And, you talk to the longtime bookmakers, guys that are in the business, you can't operate like that. You undermine the whole economy of bookmaking when you do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
I've had big time bookies complain to me about it. Like, I could call Joey and tell him, stop doing that, not happening. Yeah. The big names in Philly to take book.
Yeah.
They don't like that.
Right. So, that's just kind of part of the backstory. But this is, was a very slick production. Looks good. And my question is, are they going to be able to sustain it? And we'll
Yeah.
see over time. Time
And,
will.
yeah. And if you look at some of the other guys, Sammy the Bull, I mean, he's been on at this now for like 18 months.
Right.
His material's starting to get a little thin too,
Yeah.
content wise. You got to come up, you got to be creative, you got to have your imagination going every week. You have to look for topics, things that'll kind of blend in with the area that you're looking at, those kind of things. And Joey needs to be able to do that. Now, he gave some hints yesterday that he's going to do that. In that description I read, he's going to talk about politics. He had some not so kind words for Joe Biden. He doesn't like the whole Trump Biden thing. It's pretty clearly he's down on the Trump side. Those kind of things. I'm sure he's going to start handicapping that at some point. And he did go into all those fields you were talking about. So he's laying out kind of a plan here. And the question is, week by week, can he meet that plan?
Yeah, and everybody will be watching, and if it works, I think he'll do well with this.
Yeah,
but all of that remains to be seen. And the other thing is, I think there are a lot of old time guys spinning in their graves over this. I mean, who ever heard of this kind of? Again, we're in a different era. This all started with John Gotti in New York, the celebrity gangster, and that whole attitude of, what's the point of being a gangster if nobody knows who I am? Yeah. They want to be celebrities. And Joey was the John Gotti of Passyunk Avenue. Joey was the face of the Philadelphia mob. Joey was a personality, much like Gotti. Now, you can make an argument that Gotti Sr. ran the Gambino family into the ground with his attitude. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Joey was able to tap dance away from a lot of stuff to his credit or his lawyer's credit or whatever. And here he is, a cat with 9 lives. This is maybe life number 4. This guy has always managed to come out on the other side of whatever was going on. And this is a foray into an area that is, I think, fascinating. And it's, as I said a little while earlier, you're really cutting out the middleman. People said, Joey, why don't you write a book? Why don't you get somebody to write a book about you? He's sidestepping all of that and going right to the public. And we'll see. The problem is, Dave, and this is what it keeps coming back to is, and you're right, I think Sammy's stuff is getting a little thin. How many times can you talk about stuff that happened in the past? Mm-hmm. From your perspective as a wise guy, you're supposed to be giving insights that nobody else has. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of things I think that Joey just can't talk about. Yeah, Joey can't talk about because he's going to put himself in the middle of a jackpot. Yeah. So, that's another element in all of this. We'll see.
I'm hearing from his circle, there are areas he won't talk about and he can't talk about, as you said. George, let me ask you, from putting some feelers out after this all got rolling end of last week and now the podcast drops, what are you hearing from the local guys? And then I'll tell you what I'm hearing out of New York. They're not happy in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. It's a couple of guys said to me, look, this is Joey. Joey's always been for Joey. That's what this is about. He's not going to listen to anybody else. And he's probably getting a payday out of this. And that's the bottom line. That's what it always comes down to. Mm-hmm. When people were talking to Joey about his life rights, and he wanted $1 million. Yeah. That's why nobody ever made a movie about him. I mean, I think there were people upset because on the one hand, you're not supposed to be calling attention to yourself like this. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, this is Joey being Joey. So there's guys downtown that are just kind of rolling their eyes and saying, this is Joey being Joey.
Yeah. And you always used the line that the former mob boss, Joe Legambia, used to like to make money, not headlines. Yeah. Yeah. This goes against his philosophy 1,000%. Haven't heard anything about what his thoughts are on some of this or some of the other higher ranking guys in the family. I mean, I see a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon, supporting them, pushing stuff out there, as they should. They're his friend. This is a new venture. He's trying to make some money. Let him do it, and God bless him if he does well. But I'm not sure everybody in Philly is thumbs up on this.
No, and again, I think it keeps coming back to where is it going to go and what other kind of information is going to come out. And does that information hurt anybody? Yeah. And they got to tap dance around all of that.
Okay. I put some feelers out with folks in New York that I know, just so we're clear. George and I don't only just focus on Philadelphia. We listen to what goes on in the New York scene and some of the other places nationally, things like that. But let me be clear. The sources that I talked to told me that as soon as this started to kind of get speed at the end of last week. There was chatter among guys in the Genovese family, guys in the Gambino family. What's he doing here? What's up with this? Now, listen, Chris Colombo is doing this up in New York.
Exactly.
Similar thing, definitely not as well done as Joey's doing here. This is very polished. He clearly has a media group behind him putting this together. He has some experts in the field of social media who are pumping the stuff out. I mean, they're dropping posts on Instagram left and right. I mean, they're doing it the right way. They're coming out with a bang. It's getting some good numbers, I would say, regionally. I haven't seen great numbers yet nationally. And, George, here's the other thing. I haven't seen any national media and or publication pick up on this and say, hey, Crossing Broad had something. The New York Post, which made Joey the darling of New York during his trial, did 20 stories on Joey Merlino during his trial. I have yet to see word one in the New York Post about this venture.
Yeah, and that may come. I think a lot of people are a little bit skeptical, a little bit wondering what this is all about. If it goes 2, 3, 4 weeks and it's sustained, I think the media will start writing about it. It is a phenomena. I think it says a lot about the status of Cosa Nostra in 2023.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned earlier, this is from, if you don't like this kind of stuff, it's been a downhill slide since Gotti. Gotti Jr., then Gotti Sr., then Gotti Jr., and all of the stuff that's come out of New York. And this is an example of that. And the other thing is, and I can't emphasize this enough, these guys have always been pissed off at guys like A Light and Gravano and Franzese, those guys basically cashing in on the life. And I think there's some of these guys are saying, why should they be the only ones to benefit from all of this? And Joey's taking it to the next step.
And as you said, he can put it right out there the way he wants it. And that's funny. You know, back in the day in the 90s, I know you dropped by. I made it a weekly visit to the Avenue Cafe down on Passyunk Avenue. And this is quintessential Joey sitting at the bar or at a table in the Avenue Cafe talking sports with my old camera guy at the time, Brad now, me, or whoever else was in it. This is literally, they have captured Joey where Joey shines, which is a kind of a off-the-cuff conversation with short, staccato kind of answers, wisecracks, no shortage of F-bombs being dropped all over the place here. But believe me, if you wanted a picture of what it was like to be in the Avenue Cafe back in the 90s with Joey Merlino, you're getting a look at it right here.
No, it harkens back to the classic line that you and Brad got from him. Give me the $500,000, I'll shoot myself. I mean, that was Joey. That was quintessential Joey. And right, I think that's what they're going for in this podcast. And I think they got it in the first one that I saw. And I went back to this. The question is, can they sustain it?
Yeah. And listen, they laid out a pretty good game plan here. Like I said, those kind of things. George, put your law enforcement lenses on for a minute. I've talked to some folks in law enforcement this week. The words used with me were interesting. Oh, I'll be curious to see where this goes, that kind of thing. How do you think law enforcement is viewing this right out of the box like this?
Well, I think they monitor it to see what he's saying, see how it connects to any other cases they're trying to put together. And as I said, Joey is a master of tap dancing around this kind of stuff, but he's got to be careful.
Yeah.
You know? And I think certainly law enforcement is monitoring this. But again, it comes back to the other thing we've always talked about. Mm-hmm. These guys are not the priority anymore.
No, they
really aren't. I mean, and this is kind of inside baseball for the people that are watching. But, you know, you and I, we try to do that MobTalk sit down. Sometimes there's not enough to talk about.
Yeah.
That's the status of organized crime. If it's traditional Cosa Nostra today, it's not anything near what it used to be. Mm-hmm. And there's probably law enforcement presence monitoring this, seeing where he's going with this, rolling their eyes, shaking their head, and looking for little tidbits. And I think that could be a benefit to law enforcement if they even care.
Okay. We talked about kind of Joey's kick out line on the podcast yesterday. His little teaser there was that he's going to expose all the rats who testified against him during the trials and stuff like that. First off, everybody knows who they are. not exposing that way. I think he's talking about their dirty deeds. He talked about getting some documents. When I have all the documents, I'll get into this further. And believe me, and you, he teases that out there, and they do an episode where that's the bulk of the content in there. People will tune in to see that.
Oh yeah, and you know we've seen an example of that going on right now with that Martin Tassetta case, which is 20, 30 years old, and they're talking in the documents that were filed in that case about D'Arco and Leonetti lied on the witness stand, and they had some testimony to substantiate that. I mean, that kind of thing it can go around and around and around about, how much did he get paid? Why did he, you hear all of that. Here's the thing that strikes me in all of that, Dave. And it's maybe as I'm getting old, I'm getting more.
You're not getting old, George. Stop.
Well, I think I'm getting a little more jaded. These guys, these wise guys, I don't want to say alleged wise guys. These guys have been convicted of being wise guys, right?
Yeah.
They spend their whole career breaking the law. They spend their whole career out there playing fast and loose with the rules. Then they get indicted and they are brought to trial, and they're offended and flabbergasted to think that a prosecutor or an investigator might bend the rules to convict them. There's a certain hypocrisy in all of that. The system is designed that law enforcement is supposed to play by the rules, and these guys aren't. But for these guys to whine and complain about that, I mean, and I saw that in the reading the documents in that Tassetta case. He's complaining about this, complaining about that. Yet he and his brother and that whole Ocasio organization for years and years and years were out there doing whatever they wanted to do.
Yeah.
So that's part of this as well. So yeah, Joey can bring on all kind of stuff talk about Ronnie Previty, talk about Tommy Scafidi, talk about the Ralph Natale, talk about all those guys and the skills they got and what the government did for them.
Yeah.
A lot of that came out during trial, and jurors heard that. And even with hearing all of that, they still opted to convict in certain cases.
Yeah. I mean, he could fill up some podcasts with all the people who've testified against him. I can tell you that.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what's going to be missing in this kind of presentation, because whoever's listening to Joey as he does whatever he's going to say about that, you're not going to hear the other side of it. You're not going to hear a prosecutor or a witness say, "Yeah, well, I did that," but you're not going to get the full story.
Yeah, I've always viewed Joey as a chess player, a street chess player, maybe in the park, sitting down at a concrete table with the chessboard. But he doesn't play one chessboard at a time. He plays multiple chessboards at a time, 1, 2, 3 levels, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Some people are suggesting that this is Joey playing chess and validating that he's out, that he's out of organized crime. I don't do that anymore. I'm not the boss. I'm not this. I'm not that. I'm a new guy. I'm a new man. This is a new creation here, taking the old, well-known Joey and repackaging him to meet social media standards and Instagram and Facebook and, YouTube, all that kind of stuff in a podcast. Do you think maybe that's what this is? This is Joey saying, I got to find a way out. I don't mean out, but I mean off the front pages and out of the spotlight. He's in the spotlight here, but out of the Fed's spotlight.
That's an interesting take on all that, and could very well be. I mean, this is certainly a way to step away from that world. And as we said earlier, a lot of people in that world are not happy with him doing this. And I mean, I hadn't thought about that. Maybe that's what this is about. This is the new life, the new Joey, the new life. And he's using the old brand to advance himself. Could very well be.
Yeah. Listen, we all know Joey has a pretty busy lifestyle, George. He likes to go out at night. He likes the restaurants, the bars, stuff like that. You got to bring a lot of energy when you're going to do this every week, and you got to be on your game, But he made some promises that he's going to deliver every single week. And it does sound to me like that's his intention going into this, that he's going to come out of the box, swinging. And as we talked about, if he starts talking about guys like Previty and Ralph Natale and all those guys, I mean, he's got plenty of material to kind of intertwine into the sports stuff and, throw in some Joey stories, that kind of thing. And I thought he did a good job on the first podcast of throwing in a couple of stories. For instance, the one about Donald Trump wanted to play through when he was playing at at Mar-a-Lago or the Trump course down in Florida, and they let him play through with the Secret Service. And apparently Trump went ahead and got a birdie and came back and thanked Joey. It's a funny story. He talked about the infamous picture that's out there about with him getting his picture taken with Donald Trump in the lobby at the golf course. He said, look, Trump takes pictures with everybody. I went in there to have lunch. I said, he's taking pictures with everybody. Let's go get our picture taken. Nothing extraordinary. Of course, it turned into a front page headline all over the country and all over the network news and that kind of thing, which is why I'm a little surprised they're not picking up on this yet.
Yeah. Well, there are examples of Joey Merlino as everyman, and that's what he wants to be. And this might be a step in that direction. Now, is he going to go after Natalia? Is he going to go after Previty? Probably. He's probably got some fascinating stories that we've never heard about the interaction with those guys. Stuff that never came out during the trial because he didn't get up on a witness stand. Rightly so, I would think.
Right.
But there's a fascination with that. There are probably stories to be told. Again, how many stories are there? How many times are you going to hear them? And then where do you go from there?
Yeah, good. George, we'll come back to Joey in a little bit, but we've kind of struck up a new relationship with our friends at the Philadelphia Mob Bruno Scarfo Facebook page.
Right.
In fact, they're going to put this on their site. We're going to put it up on YouTube on the MobTalk sit-down site as well, and on Philly Prime podcast. But they were kind enough to put a little teaser out there. Joe Levin and John Lucia took care of that for us. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. And they sent me some questions from some of the members on the Philadelphia Mob Bruno Scarfo Facebook page.
Right.
So as a courtesy, and because they've been so nice to us, and the members all pay attention to this, let me give you a couple questions.
Sure.
The first one was, what is the hierarchy of the family right now? From Anonymous, by the way, this question. If Joey's the boss, but from Florida doing a podcast, who's the street boss running things? Underboss? Is Uncle Joe the consigliere, semi-retired, quietly running things from here? What's up with Johnny Chang, Phil Narducci, and the other guys? What's your thoughts on that? If Joey's kind of going legit here with this and he's in Florida, who's kind of running the show?
Well, I think you've got to look at it a little bit differently now. I think there's a hierarchy of leaders.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anybody's designated as boss or acting boss, whatever. I mean, for a while, Lancelotti was supposedly the acting.
Yeah, he was mentioned in court papers and in court in testimony that Joey introduced him as the street boss at several New York functions.
Right, and then Joe Lagambi is the old head, the consigliere.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, here's the problem with all of that, Dave. There's no money to be made. I mean, other than dealing drugs, what money is out there for these guys? Somebody mentioned in that question Phil Narducci. Phil Narducci's got 2 or 3 legitimate business operations going on. I mean, he's got the restaurant Chickies. He's got show dogs. He's got construction. I mean,
he's killing it in every one of those areas, by the way.
Yeah. So a lot of these guys are not involved, don't want to be involved, or have more important things to do than hustle for a couple bucks that everybody's scrambling to get. There's not a lot of money to be made. Yeah. A lot of these guys have gone into construction, other legitimate businesses. So, is there still a mob? Yeah. Is there a hierarchy? That's hard to say. As I said, I think 2 or 3 guys. Stevie Mazzone was certainly a leader before, and now he's away. I mean, they're recognized as leaders. They got crews that they report to Joey, I guess, to a degree. And but I don't think it's as formalized and structured as it used to be, partly because you're only talking about maybe, a dozen guys, 15 guys, 20 guys.
Yeah. And you got to look at their age, like us. They're
Yeah.
getting older. I'm going to get younger, George. I'm not going to get older. But
Good for you.
they're older. They don't want to go back to prison, so they're not going to start into serious crimes that are going to get them 10, 15, 20 years in jail, because they all have prior records, most of them, and most of them for racketeering. So do they want to take another dance down at 6th and Market Street with the feds on a racketeering indictment? No, they don't. Yeah. I've heard they personally have told me, we're not going there again.
Yeah. Well, and again, there's not a lot of money to be made. What are you going to start extorting people?
Yeah.
What are you going to get out of that? And the other thing is, everybody cooperates today. There's all kind of cameras everywhere. There's all kind of different dynamics, electronic surveillance. So a lot of these guys have just decided it's not worth it.
Yeah. Okay. Follow-up question on that from Anonymous, again, another person from the Philadelphia Mob Bruno Scarfo Facebook page. are there any young up and coming guys we should know about? And if so, do they answer to a capo? It's always the case that they answer to a capo.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Dom Grandy is one of
Right.
those up and comers. He's in prison doing 5 to 7 right now on drug
Right.
charges and racketeering, conspiracy charges, things like that. I think there's some other young guys who are at the associate level, and since they're not made guys, I'm not going to mention them by name. I think people on the street know who they are. If and when they have another clubhouse, you'll see them hanging around there, that kind of thing. But what do you think, George? Any other young up and coming guys you can think of?
No, and that may be that they've gotten smarter and they're just taking a low profile, or it may be that there just aren't any guys out there. I mean, Dom Grandy's the name that always comes up, and you see where it led him. I mean, he's in jail on that charge, the racketeering charge, and he's a suspect in a murder investigation. I mean, but in terms of other guys out there, I'm sure there are guys that aspire to it. And like you said, there's probably some guys who would be listed as associates. But here's the other thing with this organization. Last making ceremony there was a guy wearing a wire.
I was going there next. Go ahead.
So,
yeah.
It's a whole different ball game than it used to be.
Yeah. And I will say this from what I hear from my sources. There have definitely been some guys made in the last few years. I'm not sure there's a big get-together ceremony like the one that got caught on tape, which, by the way, that tape has not seen the light of day. Some quotes from it were in some court documents, but we may never – I mean, with all the effort that the FBI, Squad 1, and the U.S. Attorney's Office went through to get that tape, and we've asked the question before, would you rather have a mob boss flip or a tape of a making ceremony? I'd rather have the tape because, George, as you say, you can't cross-examine a tape.
Right.
We may never get to hear that tape. All those cases that everybody pled.
Yeah.
And they didn't have to play the tape. But believe you me, if they were to get together right now, 15, 20, 25 guys in a room somewhere, either before or after, the feds are going to find out about that if they're making new guys.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. I mean, the secret society is not very secret anymore.
No.
Yeah.
You got that right. All right, listen, here's another question. This is from Ron Glinsky. Do you guys individually believe Joey Merlino is really out of the game? Do you think his podcast is him putting his nose up to law enforcement? And do you think he's capitalizing on the fact that he knows people genuinely like him and are intrigued by him? That last part, absolutely. There are guys in Florida who hand him stacks of $100 bills to go play with, treat him to dinner, give him cars, other things, that because they're intrigued with him and they like to smoke cigars with him at a cigar bar. I'm not knocking him. I'm just saying that's the reality of it. But is he thumbing his nose at law enforcement, George, by doing this?
Yeah, but I mean, it's not the first time Joey's thumbed his nose at law enforcement. That's Joey being Joey.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my take on this. This is just social media, Joey being Joey. That's all. That's who he's always been. You know, Joey is always good for a soundbite and a quip, even when he was out on the streets. So this just takes it to the next level. And I think this question goes into something you mentioned before. Is this his way of kind of separating himself somewhat from that world? You know, I'm not that guy anymore. I'm this guy.
Yeah.
I'm the celebrity ex-mobster handicapper. And I think, and I've said this twice already today, I mean, I think he looks and says, if Gravano can do this, if Franzese can do this, if A. Light can do this, then why can't I do this?
Yeah.
That's the attitude.
It's funny. We just had a shot up of Joey on camera. It says, "Hi, this is Joey Merlino." Did you ever expect you'd see the boss of the mob in Philadelphia looking into a camera and saying, "Hi, this is Joey Merlino"? And by the way, all those fake Instagram pages out there, they're not mine. This is mine.
I mean, this guy, as I said, it flies in the face of the old school, what the mob is supposed to be. But it is 2023. It's the 21st century, and this is where we are.
One of the other questions we can probably answer this quickly. Should the Philadelphia mob family be renamed the Merlino family, George? Good question. I mean, he's been around for a long time.
We had the Bruno. It was Bruno, then it was Scarfo, then it was, the whole list of guys. It's always been called the Philadelphia mob, unlike the families in New York took the names of the old time mob bosses.
Yeah.
And then up in New England, there's the patriarchal crime family. I don't think that's really relevant anymore. It's the Philadelphia mob, and we know who it is, and it is what it is.
Okay, interesting. You wrote a book on this guy, so you're the guy to answer this question. Ron Previty is usually talked about and shown as a capo. Was he a capo, and if so, when was he most likely made into the family?
Previty claims he was made by Stanford at a very small meeting. 2 or 3 guys were there. Mm-hmm. That's when he got his button. That's when he got made. And subsequent to that, Stanford designated him a capo in South Jersey. That's, again, Ronnie was always for Ronnie. Ronnie would be promoting himself as best he could so many different ways. That was his story. That's the story I think that the feds accepted. Mm-hmm. He was able to piggyback on that and insinuate himself eventually into the other faction as a made guy and as a capo. You think about this when you talk about that particular era and who's made and who's not made, and who's legitimate. Ralph Natale, where did Ralph get made?
Yeah,
depending on I made myself. If you got
everywhere, apparently multiple times.
Yeah. Or after he wrote in the book that they've written about him, it was a double secret making ceremony attended by Carlo Gambino and Angelo Bruno. Only time it's ever happened in history. Yeah. Ralph Natale was another example of that. Is he a made guy? Yeah. I say yeah. And another example of why this family came undone. But
Joey kind of promised in the podcast yesterday that in his undoing of mob rats, he was going to talk about how much the government paid him. You know this, I know this. Ron Previty got paid a lot of money by the FBI to do what he did. The number, the last time I got my calculator out, reached close to $1 million. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, he was. I think he was getting $100,000 a month.
Yeah,
when he was wearing the wire, and that was for a year and a half. And Ronnie would say, "Let me see somebody else do that.
Yeah,
let me see somebody else put their life on the line."
Yeah.
Here's a funny aside. Yeah. A Previty aside that after that indictment came down and the Fed scooped Ronnie up and had him in protective custody for a while. They were staying, I think, somewhere down in Delaware at a motel. Mm-hmm. It was 2 or 3 FBI guys and him. And, they would go out to dinner and stuff. And I get a call from him after about 5 days, and he says, "I can't do this." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, I can't be with these guys. He said, "We went out to dinner last night, and the check came, and everybody's dividing it up as to what they bought and what they drank." He said, "I can't live like this. You just 5 people, you divide the check by 5 and you pay, or else you pick up the tab yourself." He said, they're nickel and diming each other.
Yeah.
Live like
expense report, George. You got to make an expense report out when you get back to headquarters.
Exactly right. So anyway.
Hey, listen, and you were along on a couple of these trips. If I'm correct, didn't Ron go to Europe several times and lecture about organized crime over there and his role as an undercover? And I think you were along on 1 or 2 of those, right? To also speak at those events.
No, I was never with him. I was with George.
Okay, separate, right?
With George alone one time on one of those trips. Okay. Ronnie spoke a lot of different places for the FBI. Yeah, and I think he went to Europe and he was down at Quantico all the time too.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it was, and he would get paid for that as well.
Yeah.
He turned that into a cash stream like he did so much else. And that's what, when they jump on him, when they're going to criticize him, that's what they're going to say. The feds give him this, the feds give him that.
Yeah.
But again, it came back to what you said earlier. The bottom line with Ronnie Previty was he had made tapes. And here's the tapes. Do what you want. Here's the evidence.
Can't cross-examine a tape, George. Listen, here's an old school question. Can you tell us more about Skinny Razor, DeTulio, and Friendly's Bar at 8th and Washington? Ralph Natal spent a lot of time talking about Skinny Razor as one of his kind of mentors and or colleagues during the day. And that bar is pretty famous as a hangout back in the day. Tell us a little bit. That's kind of in your wheelhouse, George.
Yeah, well, he was a little bit before my time. But I mean, the Irishman, the movie The Irishman, they focused on that as well. I mean, that was one of the South Philly spots that they talked about when they mentioned Philadelphia in there. But yeah, Skinny Razor was a guy who had, again, before my time.
Yeah.
But the reputation was Skinny Razor was the real deal. Skinny Razor was a serious in terms of doing work kind of guy, and also a money maker. And that bar was kind of the nerve center of his operation.
Yeah. There was some rumors around while Ralph was out on the street that there may have been a making ceremony upstairs in an apartment above that bar. I personally asked Ralph about that in one of my interviews, and he completely denied that and said, no, never happened. We never went there for that purpose. We might hang out there, have a drink, when he's not supposed to be in town, he was in town. And that's probably one of his stopping off points because that's where his guys kind of gathered, But he denied that in case that's kind of sitting out there. Here's another one for you, George. Again, from Anonymous. Do you think you'll ever be able to do a podcast, George, with the Crow?
No, you know what?
Nick Caramandi. Go ahead.
Yeah, Nick Caramandi. Nick is really more so than me, technologically challenged. I don't think we could pull that off. And the other thing is, Nick's. I still talk to him occasionally, but Nick, I think he's in his 80s now, and he has a tendency to drift. Mm-hmm. I don't think it would work.
Okay. Last question, again from Anonymous. And guys, if you want to tag your name on here, it's fine. If you don't, we totally understand that. We like to keep doing this with the guys from Philadelphia Mob Bruno Scarfo Facebook page. By the way, I think they're at 11 or 12,000 followers.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's really taken off.
You can see some really cool pictures on there, old school pictures, new pictures, stuff from some of the Fox 29 Undercover stuff we've done, some of George's stuff from over the years. George was on there last 2 weeks ago talking about one of his books.
Yeah.
A guy we know, Scott Bernstein, was also on there talking about one of his books about Phil Leonetti. So, they're given a forum to talk about this. I like the way they conduct their business on there. There's no negative comments on there. There's no people trashing people. By the way, if you go on there and you do that, you'll be off in a minute.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah. Last question. Who allegedly shot Rod Colombo during the Stanfa era and why? I'll let you go first there, George. I do not know a lot about that.
I was trying to do some research on that because I remember I wrote a lot about Colombo when, in fact, this is back in the day when the Inquirer had a lot of resources. They sent me out to California and Idaho because that's where Colombo was from.
Yeah.
And or being in Santa Monica, being in Venice Beach in California,
right.
Then going up to Post Falls, Idaho, was where his mother lived. Mm-hmm. And he was a kid who got involved in weightlifting and bodybuilding, and out in California hooked up with some wise guys in the drug underworld. And for a time, he was identified as a courier. And then he popped up in living in South Philly. And the supposition is either he took somebody's money from out west or owed somebody money out there and was trying to get away from it. And he was in Audubon, New Jersey. He was found shot in a car. And I don't think anybody's ever gotten to the bottom of that.
No. I asked around a little bit just to see if some of the old guys might, now that it's so far behind us, might hint at who was behind this, who did it, or what the reason was. And I got that door slammed quickly. Nobody wanted to talk about Rod Colombo's murder. I will keep digging and keep asking. And if I hear something good, maybe we'll follow up on it and do that. Listen, I want to thank the members from the Facebook page for sending us those questions. Hopefully we can do this again pretty soon. We'd love to do that. George, I'm going to give you the last word today. This Merlino thing, I think as I said, we went from dead quiet in South Philadelphia and the Philly mob to like rock concert loud in a week. And it's plastered all over the place, at least regionally. Your final thoughts on The Skinny with Joey Merlino and Little Snuff?
Yeah, the question I have is whether or not they can sustain this over the long haul. And if they can, it'll be a success and he'll do very well. But only time's going to tell, and we'll have to keep watching.
And listen, a lot of folks were thinking we were going to come on here as haters. I ain't hating this. Listen, he's putting stuff out there. We get paid to make observations and give our balanced, down the middle opinion on it that's surrounded with facts that we've uncovered over the years about Merlino and the Philly mob and things like that. We're not hating on this. You want to keep doing this? Keep doing it. I wish you luck for yourself. But if you're giving us material to talk about, we're going to talk about it. That's what we do. And that's what this podcast is about. That's what MobTalk Sit Down is about. It's all about the Philly mob. Normally, and 99.9% of the time, it's based on fact.
Yeah, I mean, and that's that's what we've always tried to do is be down there and provide information based on what we know. The other thing is, and it just is just an aside. I
Yeah.
mean, Joey's out there. Joey's not trying to hide.
No.
There are other guys who pretend to be mob experts who don't even use their real name when they're doing their podcast. And they don't have any guts. Joey, for like, love him, hate him, whatever. Joey is Joey, and he's out there, and we'll see where he goes.
Okay. Listen, for the Philly Prime podcast, Mob Talk Sit Down, and the Philadelphia Mob Bruno Scarfo Facebook page, folks, thanks for tuning in and listening. Appreciate that. Thanks again for the questions, and thanks to the guys at the Facebook page. Appreciate you giving us another audience to talk to. George, thank you for coming on. We had a little technological problems at the beginning. We ironed them out. We got it done, and I appreciate you coming on as I always do.
Always a pleasure, Dave. Take care, man.
All right. Thanks, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.